Good afternoon, everyone. I hope all of you are doing well. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Um, I first of all hope you and everyone around you are doing well and are safe. My name is Sam Thomas, and I am the Relationships Manager at Nalasha Healthcare, and I'll be the coordinator for today's webinar. The past decade has witnessed a series of regulations from CMS. With the quality payment program and the value-based care wave in the past few years, CMS has been pushing all of us towards a patient-centric care. Every regulation from the CMS comes with some turbulence to the healthcare IT systems. Now, the most recent change that has created some worry in the provider space is the 21st Century Cures Rule, which was published in the Federal Register earlier this month on May 1st. We've planned this educational webinar to help you understand the changes that this rule brings for healthcare IT systems. This regulation impacts interoperability, ONC certification program, the certification process itself, and ways that providers manage patient information. Therefore, the rule deeply impacts most of the IT solutions within our ecosystem. Now, in the interest of time, we would talk about all the changes at a high level today, helping you get an idea about the impact of the change. Now, due to the huge scale and impact of this regulation, for the purpose of this webinar, we would focus more around the changes to the ONC certification criteria. The other major changes around the certification conditions, information blocking, all of these we've parked for our subsequent webinars, which we plan to conduct in the upcoming months. In case you're interested in being a part of those also, please let us know towards the end of this session so that we can book your seat. While our speaker walks you through today's presentation, we will also have a few polls for all the attendees, and I would request all of you to answer them. During the course of the presentation, we would take questions only through the chat window on the GoToWebinar panel, where you can type your question and send it over to us. We will get that answered either immediately or towards the end of the session. Post the presentation, we've also planned a 10-minute question and answer session where an attendee who has a question can raise their hand, which is again from the GoToWebinar panel, by clicking on the hand icon just below the mute button. We'll unmute you for you to speak out your question. The purpose of this webinar is educational. So we'll have all the attendees in listen-only mode, and they'll be unmuted only during the Q&A session if you raise your hand and have a question. So I would like to introduce Kirti, who is our speaker today. Kirti is the subject matter expert for US healthcare in Nalasha Health Solutions. She comes with a long healthcare background and has spent more than a decade in the provider space. In the past, Kirti has helped a lot of healthcare technology vendors in chalking out their strategic product roadmap. With a comprehensive understanding of the clinical and the financial workflows, for the past few years, she has been playing a very influential role in helping organizations develop strategies under the value-based care program. Now, with this new regulation, she has been closely working with CMS and a lot of healthcare IT vendors, helping them with the changes that lay ahead. Right, ladies and gentlemen, so sit back, relax, grab your coffees, and I hope all of you have a meaningful session and in the end have some takeaway that will help your plans around the efforts that need to be made to stay compliant with this new regulation. Over to you, Kirti.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you all are hale and safe. As Sam mentioned, let's quickly take a look at 21st Century Cures Act for Interoperability, Information Blocking, and ONC Health Certification program, which got finalized on 1st of May. Now, to take a look at this, the whole rule is centric to patient, and the goal is to provide easy access to the patient records while protecting the patient privacy and security. To do this, practically to achieve this, there need to be the data flow which seamlessly flows from one system to another system. So that means it requires a lot of standardization. So let's take a look at where we are standing right now. There are different interoperability standards that are there in the current systems like HL7, CCDA, FHIR, NCPDPs, DICOMs. While all these are there, then the Cures Act is telling about the new standardization across all on top of all these, which is USCDI version 1. Now, apart from the interoperability, the programs are more aligned with the existing programs, which are MU3 programs, Quality Payment Program, BBC. So the workflows right now in the current systems are more aligned towards these programs. So, but what the new act is saying is to achieve interoperability on top of all this, which means solutions should be seamlessly talking from one another with one another in order to get the 360-degree view of the patient. And coming to engagements, right now it's all dependent on patient portals and wellness apps. But post after implementing the entire solution, there will be a seamless capability to get the complete view of the picture of the patient health, because systems are more integrated, they are standardized, data can be reconciled from one system to another, that helping in bringing the complete flow of the patient. Now, as I said, the interoperability will be now based on one channel, which is USCDI version 1. And the engagement is going to become more seamless with more contextual omni-channels coming into place, which brings all the different types of data that helps in building the complete 360-degree. Yep. That being said, the whole systems that having different capabilities right now are extended in order to seamlessly communicate with each other and exchange the information from not only the clinical entities, but also from the payer systems, as well as labs, pharmacies, and all, and easily build the 360-degree view of the patient. So moving on to the next one, to take a complete look into what are the changes that are involved in this entire process. Yeah, so as we discussed in the beginning, the core features that are involved as part of this 21st Century Cures Act are info blocking, USCDI, and then the complete certification. Now, coming to info blocking, it is more about making, preventing, stopping from not sharing the information. And there are certain rules that are identified where the systems can protect the information or claim themselves why they are not sharing the information. But the goal is not to stop sharing the information and make it seamless for interacting between different systems unless the patient says not to share their respective information. The next one is USCDI, which is more of a standard format, which I've been talking in the previous slide. This is more for standardization, where all the different systems right now, there are different formats that are used across different measures. So everything needs to be upgraded to USCDI V1 or USCDI Core. The respective IGs are available, which we will take a deep look into in the upcoming slides. That is more of standardization. And the third one is CHRT. Now, already as part of the meaningful use, the EHRs are compliant with some measures with the specific requirements. Now, in order to achieve interoperability, there are certain measures which are required for interoperability and certain measures which are not required. Ignoring the non-required measures, rest all measures are modified to make it align with achieving the interoperability standards. While doing this, who are the effective parties? Everybody in the ecosystem, starting from HIT vendors who provide the solutions, the care providers who again give the care to the patients. They have to understand the new workflows that will be brought into picture, and they need to take the consents from the patients in order to share the information at different stages of providing the care. And then patients, obviously, patients and their auth representatives will be impacted. And the health plans and HIEs are also going to be impacted, because now they can build the channels with different provider systems to pull their information, and they also should be able to, whoever is interacting with the government plans or the federal plans, they also have to enable the exchange of information, so that providers get to know what are the patient responsibilities or the outstanding amounts and details like that. And same with HIEs, in order to the future plan, the whole plan of this 21st Century Cures Act is seamless integration and seamless communication, which will be possible only when different HIEs interact with each other. The whole network needs to be formed. So HIAs and HINs are also brought into picture. Now, quickly taking a look at the timeline, it's starting, it's not very far. The information blocking needs to be complied from 6 months from the day of the final rule publication, which means November 2020. And from December onwards, the EHRs should start submitting, or they have to go through real-time testing, that they are not blocking any information. Patients are able to seamlessly get their data without any cost from the EHRs. So there are different steps involved, different processes involved in that, which we will be taking a look in future. The next one is USCDI. Because this is a huge standard, the existing measures
Kirti, I think we again lost you. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. So until we have Kirti back and she takes you through the details of these individual things that we heard about in this slide, we'll take our first poll until then. Can you please have the first poll for the audience? All right, ladies and gentlemen, so here's the first poll, which says, what is your current state with respect to these changes? So we know these changes, the proposed rule came in the month of March, and then the final rule came earlier this month. So there might be a lot of things that you guys will be doing in researching what the changes are like. So what's the current state with respect to these changes? So you have your 4 options. You can choose the one that best resonates with your current situation. Thanks a lot, everyone, for answering that poll for us.
Thanks for that. Now let's go a little deeper and take a look at all the different measures that are there in CHRT and how they are getting altered. To start with, the first one is ERX. So coming to these changes, the first and foremost is the script needs to be migrated from 10.6 to NCPDP 2017-071 version. Now, this change introduces a lot of transaction changes, as well as new features are also introduced. Now, coming to the transactions, now previously there were certain set of transactions as part of 10.6, but now the number of transactions are increased in order to address all the real-time use cases that are coming into picture. So let me quickly take an example. Coming to new RX, it is an existing measure and it's a mandatory measure, whereas 2 new measures are, or 2 new transactions are brought into picture called new RX request, new RX denied. What does that mean? Now, provider generally raises a new RX transaction, whereas in the alternate scenario where a patient goes to the pharmacy and requests for a particular medicine, then a pharmacy can initiate a new RX request to the provider, and provider can accept it or deny it. Now, same way, coming to the change, cancel, renewal, in between the requests and responses, where the pharmacy can also raise a request for it, and the provider can give a response to it. That is again additions. Now you see the color code here. The black represents mandatory, the blue represents optional. So you can have a curious question, why so many optional measures, not too many mandatory? to answer that, there are the whole flow, the real-time use cases are orchestrated and different triggers are introduced as part of the script. But then this is an interaction between two parties, between the provider system as well as the pharmacy system or a manufacturer system or a PBM system. Now, those systems need not have all these messages. The third-party tools which they are using may not have all the supporting messages. That's the reason they are not made mandatory for providers. But if at all those interactions are available on the pharmacy side, then all these use cases are very important to in a real world scenario for the provider to treat the patient better and make sure that the patient is getting the right medications. One such example is REMS, which speaks about risk evaluation mitigation strategy. Now, why is REMS required is if at all provider have to see the risks that are involved in a particular medication versus the advantages that the medication is going to bring for that with that medication, they can request for a REMS to understand the risk from the manufacturer, and they can get a response for it. While these are the transactions, let's also take a look at the features. The first and foremost, very commonly used message or feature within the transactions is SIG. SIG is still optional, however, the size of the SIG is increased. Coming to oral liquids, it is going to remain in metric standards. Then coming to vital information, it will be required for patients under 18 years. And coming to our exchange, different statuses are introduced where validation of the prescriber credentials, reviewing the drugs, prior authorizations, and things are introduced. Now, overall, coming to NCPDP, there are 25 plus changes. However, everything is not mandatory as part of the B3 measure. However, if everything can be implemented, then it's a seamless workflow that you're building for your providers. Moving to the next measures. First one, USCDI. Here we are covering very little because it's a huge measure. So I will, in the future slide, we will talk in detail about USCDI. However, it is going to impact all the different measures that are related to transition of care, VDT, CDA generation, the performance validator, which is G6, e-case reporting, electronic case reporting, which is F5, then patient access, which is API, which is G8. So all the measures are going to be impacted because right now all these measures are using CDA as the information channel of information generation and exchange. However, they needs to be upgraded to USCDI standard, where still the format would remain CDA, but then it should cover all the mandatory fields that are defined by USCDI version 1. So there is no more going to be common clinical data set. All the measures should comply with USCDI, and the test scripts needs to be followed for the same, and the test data needs to be generated, and then recertifications would be required for that. Moving to the next one, auditable event, again a standard change. ATSM E2147-1 is deprecated, so it is bringing E1247-18. Coming to this, duration of access is something which needs to be tracked, which is complex, but that is one of the requirements. How much for what duration is the user accessing the system, that needs to be audited. Apart from that, there are some more changes coming to D2 1.c, which means as part of VDT, we need not do audit tracking, so that the dependency of D2 would be removed there. Coming to D7, end user device encryption. Now, if at all your devices are storing any end user data, then you have to attest for it. Otherwise, it is not required to attest. And the third one, and the last one is Right now, as part of all the measures that we are presenting, corresponding audit data needs to be also attested. But going forward, it is based upon the measure, the respective audit measures from D1 till D10. Only some of them would be required to be attested. So it is not all the functionality, but specific functionality. Moving on to CQMs, the IGs are changed. Previously, we are, as part of the implementation, we were following HL7, QRDA Cat1 and Cat3 IGs, whereas the new regulation says to comply with CMS, QRDA Cat1 and Cat3, because as part of the submissions, the March submissions are quarterly submissions. Though the measure implements HL7, at the time of submission, you need to comply with CMS IGs. So to avoid that redundancy, now CMS have clarified that we can comply only with CMS QRDA measures. But then if you it's completely up to the EHR's discretion if they want to follow both of them. But as part of certification, only CMS IGs will be validated or tested. Now, what does it take to upgrade or change from HL7 to CMS IGs is more of template changes, value set changes, and entry changes in the respective Cat1s and Cat3 files. Now, if at all, while building the solution, if it is templatized, then your changes would be small. But if at all it's not templatized, then it's as big as redoing the whole thing. Uh, Now, coming to when the version is changed, very curious question you would have is, will the same testing tool be applicable? To answer that, Cypress version 5.4 is made compliant with CMS IGs, so you can use that version for doing your testings as part of the development activity. Moving on to implantable devices, again, new IGs are there in place for this, called UDI release R1. So we need to follow that. And as part of CDAs, right now we are only passing device identifier. However, as part of USCDI Core 1 standard, we might also have to submit lot numbers, batch numbers, serial numbers, manufacturer expiration dates, and IDs, distinct ID codes that, if at all, the APIs are returning. So coming to the timeline, looking at the timeline, all this needs to be implemented 24 months from the final date of, from the date the final rule is published. Now, let's take a look at some more revised measures. One more big, I would say, very big measure that got revised is data export. Right now it is B6, but after 36 months from the day of publishing, final rule published date, you need to comply with a measure called B10. Okay, now what is the change in this? Right now we are able to export single patient EHI information, whereas the new requirement, EHI is electronic health information. So the entire information, which means the entire patient information that is there during the time of certification, that's there in the system, both structured and non-structured, should be exchanged or should be exported from the system, and it should be transferable. So for multi-patients, the whole purpose of this requirement is, if at all the providers or the practitioners change from one health IT system to another health IT system, they should be able to export this data. Now, these exports should be electronic and computable, which means they can be, especially in case of multi-patient, as the data will be very huge. It's up to the EHR's discretion in which format they're exporting. But while exporting, they also need to publish the format, the structure, syntax, and the hyperlink of the documentation where it is published, because the receiving party who receives these exported files, they should be able to understand in which format it is given. They should parse the data and incorporate that data into their systems. So they need to follow this entire documentation. So the data export format should be also be part of, or it should be made available along with the export. So this is first initiative during towards real-time access of information, where the from one system to another system you can push a lot of information. While coming to imaging information and imaging element export, data export says that even that should be supported. However, AHRs can decide whether they want to give as hyperlinks or as complete data. That is something that can be identified with the best practices. So moving to the next one. The next one is consent management. You would have heard about DS4P, data segmentation for privacy. So this is again part of, there is revision in this, where previously we were the security tags were applied at document level, but now the requirement says it needs to be tagged at document, section, and entry level, because if a patient wants to provide consent for most of the information, but specific information patient doesn't want to share the details. In that case, there should be a capability in the system to identify specific entries in a section or a specific section not to be shared, or to be shared, or just or to be informed that it is secure information or the privacy information. So the tags needs to be, the tags are extended, and the depth of usage of the tags is also increased. Now coming to uh, consent management, it is more with respect to CDAs. At CDA, at what level the data needs to be tagged or identified is clear, but when come to fire resources, even those needs to be, that data will also be exchanged via the APIs, right? So the same consent management needs to be extended there as well. So for that, C2S, which is consent to share IG, are available with respect to fire resources. With fire, the existing metadata can also be used to capture the security information, and the same can be implemented for G10 measure. G10 is the new API measure. Moving on to APIs, APIs should previously, as part of APIs, it was up to the discretion of the EHR which standard they follow. But with Cures Act, it is mandatory to follow FHIR 4 format. And there are also other many requirements around authentication, authorization, registration of the application, and other details. So we will take a look at it in the upcoming slides. Now coming to the timelines, again, these two measures needs to be implemented within 24 months from the final date of publication. Then there are some new measures as well. More with respect to attestation, I would say, for privacy and security attestations. So the first one is encrypt authentication credentials. So there should be a capability in the system to authenticate the credentials. Now, as I said, this is attestation. You can answer yes or no. As part of implementation, the systems or the requirements should adhere to FIPS publication 140-2. And coming to the date, any new certifications, that are planned after the release of the final rule, publication date of the final rule, or any revisions that are planned after that date, needs to be attesting for this particular measure. Now, if at all you are not encrypting the data, you might also have to give the reason why it is not being done, like if you're using some other third-party tools, or if there is any other reason. The next important measure that got included into this attestation is multi-factor authentication. Coming to multi-factor authentication, it's up to the discretion of EHR which technology they may use. They may go with SMS, badges, RSA tokens, fingerprints, or any mechanism, but that needs to be attested. And coming to any new measures, any new certifications or revisions that are happening, they need to attest for this measure as yes or no. But if at all you are not using, you need not provide any particular reason. But then when you look into info blocking requirement, I would suggest it's always better to go with multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, so that there is more security that is incorporated into the system. Moving on to the next slide. Coming to the removals. In the removals immediate, which is June 2020, coming to this, the problems, medications, medication allergies, smoking status, CCDS and VDT. With respect to VDT, only audit activity is removed, not the entire measure. Now, why so many, why these are removed? The goal of 21st Century Cures Act is interoperability, and all these are more or less covered under USHIK. As it is covered, USCDI. So as it is covered under USCDI requirement, it's redundant, right? So these measures are removed. Coming to the next one, Jan 2022, where it's more about e-prescription related elements like drug allergy interactions, CDS, drug formularies, secure messaging. Now, again, these are achieved through other measures, so these are again removed. In May 2022, API G8 measure will be retired, and then in place of that G10 new measure with new requirement, which we'll be seeing in the upcoming slide, that is coming into place. Before May 2022, you can still go ahead with G8 measure, but post that G10 measure is required. Then coming to May 2023, B6, the data export would be retired, and then EHI, which is B10, will be coming into picture. So these are more about the removals. Let's have a quick poll question coming here.
Right. So Kirti, you can probably catch some breath, grab some water until we have the audience answer the second poll. So ladies and gentlemen, here's the second poll question. Now, most of the certification related changes that you saw in the past few slides are the ones that complement the things that we did for the 2015 certification, the QPP, the Promoting Interoperability Program. And the question is in line with that, which says, are you compliant with the Promoting Interoperability Program? You again have your four options. You can choose the one that best resonates with your situation. All right. Thanks a lot for answering that, everybody. Yes, Kirti, I
Thanks,
think we can
everyone.
move forward.
Okay, now since the first slide I was talking about USCDI, right? So let's take some quick glance about what are some of the changes that are coming in USCDI. CCDS, which is Common Clinical Dataset, that's going to retire, and then it is going to all the measures that are using CCDS as part of the CDAs, they need to comply with USCDI now. Now, as part of USCDI, there are multiple data classes and data elements that were brought into picture. I'll take you quickly through them as well, and then the reason for those introductions also we can take a look at. But before we start, I want to speak about something called as minimum USCDI V1 standards or minimum data set. Now, one of the requirements in information blocking that needs to come into compliance by end of this year, which means your existing solutions which already have CCDAs, APIs and things, they need to be upgraded with a minimum data set of USCDI, and you need to adhere to information blocking by end of the year. And so that means all the API documentation or the security aspects of the API, everything needs to be modified so that applications can seamlessly interact with your APIs and pull the information from the query for the information from the EHR systems. So to achieve that, there is minimum across all the existing CDA entities. CDIs, um, minimum mandatory fields were identified, and that needs to be implemented in the existing CDAs. So that's about the minimum USCDA CDI V1. The next one is SWAP. SWAP is a standard version advancement process. So right now we are saying version 1 can be used for USCDI. So there will be advancements and new versions, just as we saw in Fire. Right now, version 4 is available. So obviously, USCDI also will go through different changes, different profiles, and everything will be introduced to in order to adhere to more transparency or communication channels. What SWAP says is you can, if at all, the version is approved by ONC, then EHRs can seamlessly upgrade their solutions from V1 version to respective versions that get released. So again, with very minimal documentation and approvals, you can go ahead with the latest versions. Then coming to TOC, which is transition of care, you will be, as I said, it will be using CDA. However, it has to hold all the data or the data classes and the elements that are defined by USCDI. Coming to procedure codes, there is one modification that was finalized in the final rule, that you have to use CDT than to Snowdent codes, because some of the codes were missing as part of the Snowdent. Coming to some of the data classes and the elements, majorly 4 components are introduced. One is with respect to patient contact information. Now, the contact information also includes address and phone numbers. Now, those needs to be granular, and they need to be aligned with US postal standards, so that patient identification becomes more easy. And one of the core capability of interoperability is uniquely identifying the patient between systems. So if at all this standardization is brought into picture, then the chances of uniquely identifying patients will be increased, and that solves the entire uniqueness of patient during the interoperability workflows. The next one is vitals. With respect to pediatrics, more vitals are introduced, and growth charts are introduced into the data classes and data elements. Then coming to clinical notes, the final rule have identified 8 different clinical note types, including both for inpatient and ambulatory, which helps in exchanging the information between systems. The next one is provenance. Provenance is more about authors, timestamps, and authors organization. Author is not finalized, but these two attributes are finalized, and the information across all the entities, this information needs to be captured. Coming to allergies and intolerance, that is added to medications. So as part of the medication, now identifying the allergy and intolerance is required. Then coming to medication allergies, it is again changed, as previously we were only capturing medication allergies. Now it should support other allergies, food allergies, environment allergies also. So the entire thing got changed as allergies and intolerance. So these are some of the changes with respect to USCDI. Moving on to APIs. Yeah. So API measures are generally speaking from G7, G8, G9. The new one which is introduced is G10. So I will say from G7 till G10, because till 22 G8 is supported, and after 22 instead of G8 you will be using G10. Now, as part of the previous implementations, EHRs, as I said, EHRs were some of them were compliant with FHIR, but most of them were using in-house APIs, in-house structures. But then to achieve seamless integrations with different systems, it is required to use a standard, right? So both one more introduction as part of the API is single patient capability to derive data for a single patient, or multi-patient APIs, which derives data for multiple patients. So coming to single patients, coming to the standards, as such, US Core IG will be implemented, and US Core IG will define the different mandatory fields and different profiles which will be implemented through FHIR 4. Version 4. So it is mandatory to follow FHIR version 4, which implements all the USCDI data elements and US core FHIR profiles. Okay, and coming to multi-patient APIs, there is one more IG introduced called bulk data IG, because as part of multi-patient, the use cases are different where HIAs will be communicating, pulling a lot of patient information. So in that case, considering performance and other activities, the bulk data IG is introduced for that. And coming to applications like you would have heard about Smart on Fire. So all the applications that are registered with Smart on Fire should be again used as the backend service, and those applications should be seamlessly interacting with the APIs that are provided by the EHR. Now that comes to data request and response. The next item is search operations. Again, on what all parameters should the search be allowed by the external applications? To answer that, again, there is a standard. So US Core Server Capability Statement defines the possible query options that should be given on what all the applications can search for data, and that needs to be adhered. The US Core Server Capability Statement needs to be adhered there. Coming to provenance and document reference, initially as part of the uh, uh, draft rule, those were required, but then as part of the final rule, they were concluded as non-mandatory. The next important thing as part of API is an application comes to you and then comes to the EHR and asks for registration, the whole application registration process. Now, as part of the certification, this needs to be demonstrated where an application needs to be registered on the fly with the EHR APIs. And coming to the mechanism, it can be anything. How you want to enable the security between the EHR APIs and the application, because that will be seamlessly communicating and pulling data from EHR, right? So for that, initially OpenID or 2.0 different mechanisms were prescribed, but then finalized as it's up to the EHR to take whichever registration route that they want to. However, smart applications that are Smart on Fire applications that are registered, they should have seamless access to EHRs. Now, as part of certification, Drummond and other bodies are coming up with different tools in order to simulate these certification, to simulate these tests, which you can do as part of your certification process. Moving to secure connections, it is required to follow TLS version 1.2 and above. And again, coming to the requirements, Smart on Fire core capabilities should be adhered or followed as part of the secure connections. Moving on to authentication and authorization. Uh, Coming to certification, I mean, the EHR should demonstrate that there is a capability to grant access to a specific patient data or also deny access for a specific patient record. And coming to the refresh tokens, the validity of the refresh tokens are expected to be minimum 3 months, not less than 3 months, sorry. And later there should be capability to reauthorize or re-authenticate, once again provide the refresh tokens. So while you are defining or identifying the security model, you have to take care of all these aspects. Then offline access for the apps should also be provided, and when they are coming online, they should be able to again reauthorize those apps and based on that provide access to the respective data. And during certification, they can also test the JWT tokens as well as JSON web signatures. So to that level, the entire information needs to be demonstrated that the complete security is in place. Moving on to API documentation, more emphasis should be given to exceptions and error handling because that helps in seamless connections to the APIs and retrieving the information. And all this data needs to be publicly accessible via the hyperlinks, which is there in the previous certifications as well. Let's take a quick poll question. Oh, okay, sorry. Uh, Moving to the next one. Till now we have seen different regulations, different requirements across the existing measures. Now, how are different users that are getting impacted with this are patients, providers, health IT, HIT vendors, HIAs, everybody. Now, if when you see the goal is providing access to information with a lot of security, maintaining the costs of the integrations, and ensuring that the costs are not really high, and there is enough explanation for that. And there is a lot of innovation from small players who brings how these solutions needs to be safely and securely implemented. And then ultimately it gives the capability to automate all the different workflows, which not only pulls information from your systems, but you can also query different EHRs to pull to get complete 360-degree view of the patient, so that your wellness programs or the care plans are more effective and patient is pretty well improving. Now, looking at the technology focus areas, the impact is the areas that you need to touch are right from security, where you need to revisit are right from security, audit, identity management, workflow automations, APIs, USCDI, and the whole documentation, how data is flowing from one system to another system. So yes, everybody have their uh, important role to play here to get the advantage of the entire new rule. Let's take a quick poll question here.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we have the third poll coming in. Now, most of the changes that you saw, some or all of those might resonate with the kind of healthcare IT solution that you have. So the question says, how relevant are the changes for you, which you saw for the past 40 minutes? You again have your four options. You can choose the one that best suits. All right. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for answering that.
Okay, now if we don't update the technology, what's going to happen is, or if at all it is not taken care from a technical aspects, then there is information blocking. Either data is not sent to the end parties, where you will fall under information blocking, where again ONC, you have to go through different audits or identification of one-on-one cases with ONC to exactly identify where the problem is. That is one aspect. Rather, if you give complete access to the entire system, then security is something that you need to make sure that the it is not causing, or you're not giving access to some information which patient doesn't want to give access to. So you need to make sure that the solution is very secure enough, so that only authorized applications or uh, non-vulnerable requests are coming into the system, and you are giving the right data. While doing that, you also need to trace for whom, what are the different requests that are coming in, what are the requests, or what are the responses that are going out. With different HI integration, there will be volume of different requests that will be coming into the system. So you need to track the entire uh, chain of actions that are happening in the system in order to identify later, or at different intervals if some hack or an issue is happening in the system. The next one is interoperability and data governance. While you are doing interoperability, it's not only sending the data out of your system, but also receiving data from outside system. So you need to check if the right data is getting incorporated. You're not overwriting with wrong patient's data, so that your records are not corrupted. And you also have to make sure there will be huge data, so data archivals, data cleanups, all these are well planned so that the performance is not impacted. Now, huge data exchange is going to happen after the whole system is going to be in place. Then a lot of governance is required to make sure it's not impacting on a wrong side. Looking into the business impact, if at all it is not completely meeting with the requirement, then there will be regulatory issues where you would need to go through the explanations why information is not provided, or your certification might have to go through terminations and all that. So that will be, if at all it is not implemented, that will be a regulatory impact. Looking at the relationships, again, yes, a lot of customer dissatisfaction. So that is also impacting. And overall, at an operations perspective, you will be you have to manage the costs, because for the services, the cost needs to be managed well, and the overall financial repercussions should not be ended up for the organization. So everything needs to be well balanced and managed with the new requirement. Moving to the next slide. Just as what we spoke, let's quickly take a look at other activities that would be
Apologies for that, ladies and gentlemen. I think there is some connectivity concern that Kirti is facing right now. So until Kirti comes back and walks us through the areas beyond the things that we spoke about today uh, that fall under the rule or its implications to the health IT systems. Until then, we can probably take our final poll. We can have you answer that and wait for Kirti to come back. All right. Now, as I mentioned during the initial half of the webinar, that we plan to conduct subsequent webinars after this around specific topics, which is the conditions of certification, and another vast topic, a pretty detailed one, which is information blocking. So we would want to understand if you're interested in being a part of any of the upcoming webinars. We'll be sure to share the exact details, the dates and timings of that, but just to help us understand your interest levels of attending that. Wonderful. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody, for answering that. Over to you, Kirti. I think we can continue from where we left.
okay. Uh, sure. Once again, sorry about that. The weather is really bad. So coming post data governance, there should be unique identification. Now, patient needs to be uniquely identified in the system. So there should be the mechanism to, when you receive the data, when you're incorporating the data into the system, you need to uniquely identify the patient. You need to make sure that you are not giving a wrong patient's data when a request is coming. Even while you're returning the data, you have to ensure that the right patient's data is returned as part of the responses. And coming to the security, when the third party applications are doing the registration with you, you have to make sure you cannot stop registration of those applications, but then you have to identify, if you're not allowing a specific application to register, then you have to identify what is the actual reason for not allowing them, because you should not end up in information blocking situation. While all this is there, proper audit log should be there, which gives a trail of complete actions, which details down who is accessing what, if there are any violations that are happening in the system. All that needs to be identified and well audited. Now, coming to the patient lifestyle tracking, it's more about you exactly follow the patient with different device integrations, get a complete information into the system, and make sure the information that you have reconciled is giving the right data about the patient or not. Maybe you have the right data, but when you reconcile, you get a different information about the patient, which should not corrupt or change the status of the patient that is there in your system. So again, different workflows should be there, which helps in detecting whether you are doing the right merge or not, and make sure that your data is not lost. Then coming to transparency, CRM capabilities, both are both coherent, both go hand in hand, where it helps in achieving or streamlining more processes, bring more integrations, and make sure you are not uh, uh, going into information blocking allegations. Moving on to automation, now that a lot of integrations are available, you have to wisely decide what different automations can be time boxed or scheduled at different intervals, so that more you take the better advantage of the technology and get more data into the system. Now, these are some of the uh, steps that you have to take in order to make sure that you are not landing up in information blocking, as well as you are ensuring that there are no threats to the system, the security is tight, and then you are also taking advantage of the data that is available to you as well, and not corrupt your existing data.
All right.
Uh,
Thanks a lot, Kirti, for all the information you've shared today around what actually changes with this new regulation. I'm sure this would help our audience better plan their product engineering roadmap for the upcoming time. So, ladies and gentlemen, today the changes that Kirti spoke about were a subset of the entire regulation. In addition to these, there are further more complex changes around ways in which you exchange information and, of course, the information blocking part. For this, you need to amend a lot of workflows, security frameworks, and a lot more things. Now, the good part here is the sequential timeline that the CMS has kept against the different changes. You would have noticed during the initial part of today's session that HIT vendors, HIT solutions need to comply with some of the changes by the end of this year, while other changes are spread across the upcoming couple of years. Now, with that said, we believe that a strategic approach to achieve all of this is very important. And what you see on the screen are a few simple steps that would enable that. Now, the time consuming part here are the first two steps where you need to break the rule down into smaller pieces, understand its impact, and chalk out an approach for the changes that need to be done. The latter steps, the third and the fourth one, are then building on top of the foundation. In the past 3 months, ever since the regulation came out, we have been researching on it, trying to understand the nuts and bolts of the changes. So this has helped us understand the regulation and also think of the potential approach that might make sense for healthcare IT vendors. So we've been assisting some of our partners in chalking out a product roadmap, a product plan for the upcoming few years, saving them from the overwhelming job of understanding the regulation. So if you would like to leverage any of those inputs from us, you can feel free to drop us a note after this session. Yeah, so that's all that we wanted to cover today. We now have the floor open for questions. You can either send us your question in the chat window or raise your hand and we'll unmute you for you to speak out your question. All right, so I see a question coming in from Gary Clear. Gary, I'll unmute you. You can go ahead and speak your question and we'll have that answered by Katie. There you go.
Hi guys, this is Gary Clear. We have an EMR, PMS, and a patient portal, and we very well know what needs to be done for the certification and the interoperability changes. Now, what's ambiguous is the information blocking part. With all the exceptions there, how do we decide what would be considered as blocking information, and where all would we be exempted with this?
Hey Gary, Um, yeah, it's yes, as you mentioned, it's pretty tricky because as part of information blocking, there are certain regulations that are defined as part of the final rule. However, it also depends on the workflows that you have in your system. So while you are implementing some of the API changes or the measures, you also have to take care, as I said, security is one aspect, audits are one aspect. So certain things, though it is not very relevant to it, while building the workflows, you have to make sure that it addresses most of the scenarios of information blocking, and you need to build the solution. So though the EHR measures are different and information blocking is different, but overall, when you look at it, information blocking is something which says that you are stopping sharing the information, which is on top of some of the measures of EHI and APIs. As part of those workflows, you need to incorporate these as well.
Okay, all
Hope
right.
that answers.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot for your question, Gary. I think we have another question coming in from Seth. Seth Middleton. Hey, Seth, I'll unmute you. You can go ahead and speak your question.
Oh, hey, this is Seth here. I've got a question for you guys. We are in EHR, so could you tell me when this would be applicable to us? And also, is there a timeline by which we need to get it done?
I am, hey Seth, so coming to the EHR first, if at all you are 2015 certified, then you need to make the necessary changes to the APIs, and you have to upgrade your CCDAs to comply with USCDI V1 minimal changes, and then you should be starting complying with information blocking by end of this year, which means you need to update your documentations. You have to make sure that the APIs are returning data. You have the application registration process in place so that unauthorized applications are not querying your data. So some of these things needs to be immediately addressed in order to start enabling information blocking requirement by end of this year.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Seth, for that question. So I don't see any more questions coming in from the audience. All right then. So thanks a lot, everyone, for the time that you've invested today and patiently observing the shared content. Now, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on our website soon. We'll also be sure to share a link with all the attendees. If you have any questions, any clarifications, you can feel free to reach out to us on the email address from which you got the invite. That is sam@nalasha.com. That's me. And we'll get back to each one of you personally and have those answered. Thanks a lot once again, everyone. We would love to hear back from you. You guys have a good afternoon. Stay safe and take care.
Thanks, everyone.